The Building Better Relationships Journal and Meditation. We created the Building Better Relationships Journal and Meditation so you can magnetize the better relationships you want and focus on the positive role that you have in creating a better life through your relationships. We are excited for you to discover the gold within you that can help you manifest the love we all crave. The Building Better Relationships Journal has coaching questions that help you listen to the truth of what you want and what helps you to be empowered in love. The Building Better Relationships meditation is designed to strengthen your heart's ability to be that change you wish to see in the world. Why not download it now and think of it as a gift to those you love? If you love journaling and meditation, this is for you. Welcome to Building Better Relationships at Home and at Work with Angela and Patty podcast. This is Patty, a leadership and work-life balance coach from Arizona, USA.
And this is Angela, love and relationship coach from Sydney, Australia. And we are building better relationships with you.
Sharing new perspectives on being heart-centered at home and at work.
So you can draw on your inner power to make your relationships and the world a better place to be around. In this podcast, we have a special guest, John Kenny, the relationship guy.
John Kenny is an award-winning relationship coach to people who want to attract or create healthy, loving relationships. He is an author, speaker, documentary maker, and the host of the Relationship Guy podcast. He has been involved in the field of personal development for nearly 20 years, and in that time has not only helped thousands of clients, but has also completely changed his own life.
John spent his life full of self-doubt, carrying negative beliefs from his childhood that impacted in every area, his relationships, his career, and even his time as an international athlete. It has become now his passion in life to help people find the healthiest, highest quality relationships possible and understand the complexities of human behavior when it comes to how we relate to each other. His approach is a fusion of coaching, counseling, psychology, and NLP, and is used to unlock the things that stop people achieving, keeps them stuck and unfulfilled, to finding the love that they want and living the life that they choose.
Welcome, John. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Patty. Hi, Angela. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're so excited. Can you please tell us and the listeners about you and why you are so passionate about what you do as a relationship coach?
Awesome. Yeah, of course. Well, as you already mentioned in that introduction, I've worked for nearly 20 years in personal development. I first started training in this field sort of 19 years ago. And once I became qualified as a therapist, looking back now, I noticed that it didn't really matter what people were going through, whether it was depression, anxiety, whatever issues they were coming to therapy for, relationships always played a key part in that. So whether it was current relationships they were struggling with at the time, it was relationships from their past that were influencing how they believed things and how they saw things and what triggered them in adult life. And putting that together with my own personal experiences of relationships. So I learned quite a lot about relationships as a child, and it wasn't entirely healthy. And so I decided in my subconscious that I was going to continue to have unhealthy relationships forever. And it wasn't until I realized what I was doing as far as relationships were concerned, and significantly the relationship I had with myself, that I was able to change my life and put myself into a much happier, healthier and fulfilled space. And putting those kind of two thoughts together, I thought, well, actually, if I'm going to be a coach, which I trained in 2012, when I decided to go completely out on my own leave, I left the National Health Service in 2016, and wanted to just do coaching and started my coaching business. I thought that's where I want to focus, because it has such a big impact on everything that we have going on in our lives, that it seemed like the best route and where I thought I could make the most difference. And that's why it's such a passionate thing for me, because it makes such a huge difference to people. And as I said, it made such a huge difference to me.
You sound like Patty and myself.
Yes.
We've been working in very different areas, but we saw how much the relationships impacted everything, and people were so held back by some of those things. So I heard you say, like, some of your beliefs about childhood affected your adulthood. So can you tell us, what is an attachment style?
Yeah. So when we're born, we need to connect. It's a survival instinct. And if we don't connect, then or more or less our brain thinks we're going to die. So it's hugely significant that when we're born, that the person that is around us, the parent or kind of figure, is someone that we feel safe with, secure with, and nurtured by. Otherwise, it can play havoc with the wiring in our brain and how we then view relationships, as we learn to attach to those primary caregivers. Now, if we experience the core conditions, the love, the acceptance, the encouragement, and that security is created, then what we generally grow up with is what is called a secure attachment style. So that as adults, we have healthier relationships, we can manage difficulties in relationships, we're generally secure within ourselves, within relationships. And so we don't really have relational issues based on an attachment style. That's not always the case, but generally that's how it works out. If we don't receive those conditions, then we'll grow up with what's called an insecure attachment style. And depending on how our brain interprets those experiences, we'll either grow up with what's called an anxious attachment. So that's probably a child that was left to cry a lot, was seeking attention all the time, became a bit needy, clingy, and demanded kind of attention from their parents when it wasn't there. And then as an adult, when we become uncomfortable in relational experiences, that kind of behavior gets triggered. We become very anxious, quite stressed out, and then that we can recreate that space of chasing affection because our anxiety becomes too much and we need someone else to kind of satiate the emotions that we're experiencing. We weren't taught how to soothe ourselves, so we look for someone else to soothe that situation for us. You can have an avoidant attachment. So rather than chasing the affection, you remove yourself from the painful experiences. So you can shut down. They have noticed in some studies that children have shut down so much from their parents that they actually stop eating. They just can't function physically because that affection is not there, that security and safety isn't there. So their brain is saying, well, we're not going to survive. So they actually just shut down with their kind of survival instinct completely. And that falls into two categories. So there's an avoidant fearful and there's avoidant dismissive. So a fearful avoidant, which is what I used to be, or what I now like to call myself, a fearful avoidant in recovery. Because it's something that's hardwired in my brain, so I have to keep working hard at not being an avoidant. Is someone who desperately wants to be loved, someone wants to be in a relationship. They're the kind of people that may love bomb, that type of thing, because they go full into the relationship at the start because they're seeking some kind of connection. And then when they reach a level of depth of connection in their relationships, their brain goes, this now feels very uncomfortable and unsafe, and I'm now going to remove myself from this situation. So therefore they love bomb and then ghost, generally, if you put them in that kind of terms. Maybe not so severe as a ghosting, but that's the kind of behavior they might exhibit. They'll go a bit cold. They can sort of be madly in love with you one minute and then have nothing want to do with you the next, because their brain can be that severe in the way that it shuts down from connection. But on the whole, there'll be a sort of a gradual retreat from the relationship, and you won't know what's going on, which is really terrible for an anxious person who generally, unfortunately, falls for an avoidant fearful type, because an avoidant fearful type creates all the core conditions that an anxious person's looking for, and then they withdraw it all, and then the anxious person then starts to chase them, and it goes around in this merry dance of unhealthy and sometimes quite toxic relationship stuff. Codependency would be an example of that in a codependent relationship. The dismissive avoidant basically doesn't do relationships at all. They keep everything as surface level as possible. They're a friends with benefits type of person if it's a sort of sexual, intimate relationship. And they'll keep friends generally a little bit arm's length and stuff as well, because the idea of being connected just is too painful subconsciously. And so therefore they just don't allow themselves to feel too much too deeply, because it's such an uncomfortable space. And then the third type of insecure attachment is called disorganized, or an anxious avoidant. So they generally have experienced some kind of trauma in childhood. So the primary caregiver has made them feel massively unsafe. So they may have witnessed abuse between parents, they may have been abused themselves. And so the person that's supposed to be providing them with security, love, and affection also causes them the most distress. And not just distress as in they're not giving them love and affection, but they're probably harming them in some way as well. And so therefore, when they start to get feelings for somebody, it becomes very disorganized. This person that I care about is also a person that could really hurt me, so I have no idea how I'm supposed to feel. So I could be anxious about it one minute and try and avoid it the next. And they might go around in this kind of cycle within themselves where they don't really know how to be in a relationship and become quite confused, hence the disorganized tag that it's given.
Wow. That really taught us a lot there about why people behave the way that they do in relationships.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
Yes.
It leads to lots of different issues as well in adulthood. It can lead to personality disorders. It can lead to eating disorders. It can lead to all gambling addiction and stuff like that, because it's such a dysregulated emotional space that we can end up doing lots of different things that cause us harm because of it. Then.
So why can an unhealthy toxic relationship lead to more than you would imagine?
Ooh, it creates all sorts of chaos. I mean, as I said, with an anxious type person, if they're with an avoidant type person, that can lead to quite a toxic environment space, because the avoidant is doing whatever they can to draw the person in the first place. And then once they've done that, they have a tendency to kind of walk away. And then the anxious person has already become attached at that point, so they start chasing. And then when they get a bit fed up, maybe with chasing, they'll start to walk away, and the avoidant goes, oh, it's safe for me to come back now. And then they'll step towards the anxious person. And the anxious person then thinks, I'll give them another chance. And then they come back again, and the avoidant runs away. And then the anxious person becomes anxious again. And then they step away, and the avoidant goes back. It can cause that type of problem. And something like that can lead to something like trauma bonding. So trauma bonding is when we are in this kind of toxic, abusive relationship, and all the hormones that then get released when we're happy and then stressed become quite, not addictive, because you literally you can't become addicted to your own body chemicals, but it can feel very addictive. So you don't know what to do when you're not experiencing those ups and downs. And so you'll keep going back to these types of relationships, or back to that relationship, because your brain and your body is craving a hit of those hormones, and also your brain's in a kind of crazy mixed up kind of state where you don't really own your own emotions, and therefore you seek out that up and down type thing all the time, and obviously that can lead to quite abusive relational spaces. Something like that happens with narcissists as well. Narcissists have a tendency to break you down and make you fall for them because of all the false personality they put up in front of you. So you can get drawn in because they'll try and make you feel like you're very safe and very loved and very cared for. In a lot of cases, but in some cases they're just narcissists, and people fall for narcissists because it feeds their unhealthy needs to be with someone who's going to abuse them and not love them the way that maybe they weren't when they were growing up. Yeah, so it can lead to all sorts of difficult outcomes, and if it's not addressed, you have a find that people have a tendency to keep finding themselves in similar types of emotional spaces, and then when they do find something healthy, they don't know what to do with it. So I've throughout my time of experiencing disastrous and destructive relationships, because I had a specific what I call attraction type, I had an attraction style to certain types of people based on not just my attachment but actually the outcomes. Again, you mentioned the word beliefs there, what I believed about relationships. So my beliefs I would make come true, basically. So if it was a healthy relationship space, and my belief was that relationships are unhealthy or unreliable, that they never last, then I would create the outcome. So I'd be in very healthy relationships with very secure people, and my brain would go, yeah, this isn't right. And so I would destroy that in some way. I'd sabotage it. I'd act like a complete asshole in some cases, because I wanted that I needed that relationship to come to, I needed an out, really, and it needed to come to an end in some way, and I needed a reason for it to finish. And if I couldn't find one, I'd make one. And so therefore I would cause myself no end of pain. I caused a lot of other people probably quite a lot of pain as well, because I wasn't aware of what I was doing and what was going on, and neither were they, and I was just kind of messing everything up.
So I have a question, John. Do an avoidance person and another avoidance person, do they ever connect? Or is it normally always opposites?
They don't connect. They can be in relationships. So actually, this is an interesting story. I spent my whole life dating anxious type connections, and then I married an avoidant. So I did all this work thinking I was like on top of my game and everything. I knew exactly how it worked. And then I met somebody, and because it felt different, I thought, well, this must be right then, because I've done all this work. There's no drama. There's none of this instant attraction that I would feel. After 2 weeks of being with them, I thought, oh, this is going nowhere. It's a bit boring. I'm not sure if I even find them that attractive, or I'm that attracted to them. And I thought, oh, maybe this is my brain telling me that this is the kind of person I should be with. And it turned out that she was even more avoidant than I was. But it worked really well at the start, because we kind of lived this parallel life where we kind of came together when we needed to. And so there was some sense of closeness there. And we did love each other, because otherwise we wouldn't have got married. But we were still living slightly disconnected in the relationship. So she would do her thing, I would do my thing. And then as I realized that what I'd done, so I wrote my book in 2018, and while I was writing my book, I thought, oh, I think I've married an avoidant. I'm trying to be close to somebody, and I can't be. So the more I tried to get close to them, the further she ran away, until eventually she ran so far away that the relationship had to come to an end. Because I couldn't catch her up, and so therefore I stopped chasing, and then we just basically then lived separate lives for a short amount of time before we separated. And so I say I spent my whole life dating my dad and married my mum. Because my dad's an anxious type person and my mum's an avoidant type person. And it's interesting that I thought I'd sorted myself out. I thought because it was different, it was the right thing, but actually I'd just gone from one extreme to the next.
That's very interesting. So explain to us what the importance of a relationship in life is, and how we move past some of these tendencies to become healthier so that we can have the relationship that we always wanted.
Okay. So relationships are everything. I'm sure you agree, being that we're on the Building Better Relationships podcast.
Yes.
that you're nothing without them, really. I mean, you know, you can be someone that's completely shut away, but as I said, as soon as we are born to connect. We need to connect in order to survive. We are a tribal species. We're a group species. If we hadn't been a group species, we wouldn't probably be where we are as a species today. So, you know, we needed to have that sense of connection for survival, and it's a connection that lasts a lot of years compared to a lot of other animals that, you know, usually they get chucked out of the family nest a year or two later, whereas, you know, we're very dependent on our on survival for many years. And so if the relationships are not there, we are going to suffer. We are not going to live the most fulfilled and happy lives that we can. In fact, there's a study from Yale University, which is the Grant Glueck study, and they released some results after 75 years, but now I think it's an 80-year study, and they were doing a study into happiness, and they after 75 years they concluded that the key to happiness was the quality of your relationships. So if you had bad quality relationships, you weren't as fulfilled as the person that was experiencing good. And that doesn't mean just personal relationships, as family, work, friends, and everything else. So the quality of your relationships dictates the fulfillment and happiness of your life as a whole. And that's why they're really important. You know, we do need to connect, and if we are unable to connect, so for instance, me as an avoidant type person, I've had to do a huge amount of work on understanding my background, understanding my idea around relationships, what my beliefs are, what my attachment is, what my attraction style's like, what my pattern forming is. Again, we fall into patterns. We all have behavioral patterns, but we also have relational patterns. What I'm prepared to offer a relationship, to give to a relationship, as well as what I want from a relationship. Again, if I work with my clients and I say, what do you want from your relationship, that they don't really know, it's not something they've really ever considered. They will tell you what they don't want, but as we know, what we focus on, we create, as Buddha may have said 2,500 years ago, which is a quote that's been attributed to Buddha. So if I'm focusing on everything I don't want in a relationship, I'm bringing everything I don't want into my life. So it's about saying, okay, what do I want? But actually, what am I prepared to give? So if I'm an avoidant type person, and I then get into a relationship and I start to feel like I need to run away, if I've already told myself that what I really want is a deeper, meaningful connection with someone, I'm very comfortable with that. If I don't get that, I'm not going to be particularly happy, and therefore I've overcome everything that's going to stop me from doing that. Then at least I'm preparing myself that when those avoidant moments kick in, I can say, oh, you know, that's what I don't do that anymore. I've created some new neurons in my brain so that when the old neurons start to fire off and take me down the avoidant route, or the destructive route, or the self-sabotaging route, I've got a plan B, which has hopefully now become my plan A, and say, okay, no, that's not what I do anymore. But it's about just understanding, being aware of what you do as far as relationships are concerned and how you view them. And then obviously the kind of maybe the major part of that is if you've got a good relationship with yourself. So if you don't feel like you deserve a good relationship, you can't have what you want, that you're unlovable, whatever it might be, if you're carrying any sort of negative self-beliefs there, then it doesn't matter if someone comes in and showers you with affection. If you don't feel like you deserve it or you're worth it, you're not going to be able to accept it, and it's going to be difficult for you to engage in that relationship as fully as you possibly can.
Yeah, I often find that healthy attachment styles, and even just healthy people, really need to have a sense of creating something wonderful in a relationship. And we're not taught that in childhood. We watch, like monkeys watch their parents. That's how we learn about relationships. My dream is that in school we're actually given these visions of a healthy relationship, to have that practice of imagination and envisioning what you want in a relationship.
Yeah.
So Can you share, John, how physical and our psychological health is impacted and connected to the quality of our relationships?
Yes. So obviously the emotional side, I think, is probably quite self-explanatory. We're going to be emotionally unhappy if we're not in a fulfilling relationship. The mental side of it, again, as I said, with attachment styles and stuff as well, you can create depression, anxiety, other mental health disorders. So if you're not in a supportive, loving, encouraging relationship, then you're not going to feel that safe. And so that can have play out on your kind of mental ability to kind of function on a day-to-day basis. If someone's constantly criticizing you, or wanting to know where you are all the time, or isn't supportive of your ideas, or puts you down because they don't want you to be a success and things like that, then you're going to really suffer, because you're going to doubt yourself. You're not going to feel supported. Your mental health, it could struggle because of that. And that's what I was saying earlier on about when I was in therapy as a therapist. I noticed that it didn't really matter what someone was bringing to the session, whether it was depression or whatever it might be, there would be a relational element to that, and was deeply affecting their emotional and their mental health. And in some cases, it was affecting their physical health. So I had a client who had, I'm going to get the right one here, ME, and so had some therapy, and their ME went away, because what she was holding on to was all of this pent up emotion from an abusive relationship when she was younger. And just being able to express that was then enabled her to be much healthier physically. So she let go of a lot of the things that were keeping her tired, fatigued, and everything else that was draining her, because she was constantly in this state of trauma and stress. I've had other clients that have had things like irritable bowel syndrome, dry skin conditions and things like that. I remember when my parents got divorced, I developed psoriasis because of the stress that I went through when they got divorced. And if I get stressed now, I occasionally, not so much, that's probably been about 5 or 6 years, but still occasionally I get an itchy head. But back 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, I would get dry scalp, I'd get dry skin on my face, and I think, oh, what's going on? I must be a bit stressed, because I noticed that would come out in my skin. So we're in a constant state of stress with relationships. If they're not healthy spaces, all of those hormones that get dumped into your system have got to go somewhere. And if they're not released, I think as through our tears and stuff like that, so that's why sometimes I would cry, to get rid of some of these stress hormones, then they can build up within our cells and cause us physical damage as well as anything else. And I don't need, obviously, maybe your listeners aren't aware, but what happens when you go into stress mode is all the blood leaves your stomach. So you go into fight or flight or freeze, and then the blood needs to go to the spaces or to places where it thinks it's going to be needed. So that's generally to your arms and legs, because you're going to have to fight or run away. So it leaves your vital organs and things like that. So therefore it can cause stomach issues and all sorts of manner of things, because there's not enough blood being supplied to your organs if you're in stress all the time. So again, that's going to have a long-term physical impact.
And then our perception of the body is a real thing that I am fascinated by. So you're an athlete when you were young, and I'm wondering, how did age and everything you discovered about relationships change the way you relate to your body?
My relationship with myself has changed the way that I relate to my body. I ran for Great Britain as a sprinter when I was in my late teens and my early 20s. And I think I first got positive validation from people because of what I looked like. And obviously then as an athlete, because of what I was achieving. And I obviously had quite a good physique. because I was a sprinter. So I'd do weights and I'd be training 6 to 7 times a week. So I'd get a lot of compliments about what I looked like. And then when I stopped athletics when I was in my mid-20s or so, I went into did a bit of bodybuilding and stuff like that. But I was, up until I had my coaching, I was only doing it so I'd feel really guilty and terrible about myself if I didn't go to the gym. And I beat myself up and criticized myself quite badly if I missed a gym session. And it was because I was still looking for external validation based on what I looked like. Unfortunately, when I let go of that stuff, it did actually send me completely the other way, that I just stopped exercising altogether, which led to quite a few. So I ruptured my ACL because I didn't have strong enough legs to play football and stuff like that, because I'd gone the other way. So I went from one sort of self-sabotaging space into another because I hadn't done all the work I needed to do on myself. But now I go to the gym 5 times a week. For me, I don't go for anybody else. I have an idea about how fit I want to be and how I want to look. And whereas before I'd be like, oh, is anyone watching me? And can they see what I look like? And, you know, what I'm lifting and stuff. I go to my gym, I put my headphones on, I do my workout and I go home, because it is just for me that I do it now. So my relationship with myself is something that determines how I want to look physically, and I believe your body is a temple as it's such a reason, because it's such a fascinating, complicated, and beautiful thing that you need to look after it. So, you know, I have that kind of mantra anyway, and because I did athletics and stuff, I think that was something that I've always believed anyway. That, you know, you've got a beautiful machine here, so you do your best to look after it. So that's what I do now, but for me and not for anyone else.
That's very important to be doing it for you. Can you describe to us how our subconscious mind is in control of the majority of what we think and what we do?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier on, I was driven a lot by my subconscious. But, you know, depending on who you believe and what research you read, between 80 to 95% is what people say is subconscious. So that includes your heartbeat and your liver function and your digestion and all that as well. But about 80% of your thought is supposedly, depending again if what research you read, is unconscious or subconscious. So it's very rare that we're actually in conscious thought and thinking about what we're doing. So it drives a lot of our behavior. And if we're carrying sort of maladaptive ideas around ourselves, around relationships, around life, then it will dictate all the actions that we take. As I said before about self-sabotage, when I was an athlete, I know now that I didn't believe I deserved to be an athlete. I didn't deserve to be running for the country and being in the spotlight and stuff like that. So when I'd get to any sort of major races, my brain would do its best to show me that I wasn't good enough. So I'd go down in the blocks of like I remember the first time I ran for Great Britain as a senior, I went down in the blocks and I was singing a song in my head. You know, I was not focused on where I needed to be. And now I look at that and think, oh, that was my brain trying to screw this up for me. I needed to be completely focused on where I was, but something in me wasn't allowing that to happen. So yeah, that was my subconscious playing games with me. But it was controlling what it thought was the right thing to do. And as you mentioned when you asked the question early on, is the things that we can do to overcome the things that we do is to be conscious. The more conscious we are, the better decisions we make generally. If our subconscious is going to take us down a wonky route, and the more conscious we are about something, then the more then that becomes our subconscious. So if we want to be driven, if we want our subconscious to be in control, we need to make sure the subconscious is a healthy space. So again, as I mentioned, neurons in our brain earlier on, if we've got a firing pattern which says you do this when this happens, we need to do something consistently enough and in a different way to then create a new neuron firing pattern that takes us down a different path subconsciously. It's like learning to drive type thing. You know, when you first learn to drive, you're thinking about the gears, you're thinking about braking and mirrors and everything else. And then hopefully if you become more confident in that space, you stop and you just drive, because you've created a neuron pattern in your brain, which then makes driving easy, and it's just become second nature. And that's what we can do with relationships and everything else that's driving our subconscious. We put enough conscious messaging into our lives, which then becomes part of our normal day-to-day kind of thought patterns and routines, and then subconsciously it will drive us on to better results.
Wow. Well, earlier in your bio, we talked about that you're a documentary maker. Can you tell us a little bit about your documentary, Forget Me Not, The Child You Left Behind, and where people can find it?
Yeah, of course. So a few years ago, I was at a well-being show. I had to stand there and did a little talk, and a guy who was a filmmaker, and we were having a chat, and he said, "I'd really like to make a documentary about you and some stuff that what you do." So we had a little chat, and this was before lockdown and stuff. So this was before I kind of gone into the just a relationship space. Although I was a relationship coach, I was focusing on that time more on working with people that were already in unhealthy and sort of toxic relationship spaces. And one of the things that we were talking about was how your childhood can impact on your choices in relationships, and especially if there's parts of you that don't feel whole, so authentic and congruent. So the child that you left behind is the parts of yourself that didn't fit in as a kid. So if you were told, so for instance, that, you know, say you were always messing about as a child and someone constantly criticized you, put you down, told you to stop. So that fun loving maybe part of yourself is something that wasn't accepted. So you can suppress that. That can also be then something you can continue to suppress throughout your life. And then when you try and be a bit more outgoing, funny and joyous and stuff as an adult, it feels very incongruent, inauthentic and unaccepted. So you push it back again. And the documentary is about understanding those parts of yourself that you don't accept, and how you can then bring those parts forward to be a whole and authentic person again. And the documentary talks about that and has some kind of tips and stuff of how you can sort of understand those parts of yourself and bring them forward and be comfortable and accepting of those again, so that you can feel okay. It's like the parts of yourself, I don't know if you drink, but you might notice that someone becomes slightly more gregarious, a little bit more confident when they drink. And generally that's because the part of your brain which is suppressing that has been switched off by the alcohol. And so therefore the part you're suppressing is allowed to come back out and say hello. And I've had many a client who said, "Oh, I don't drink because when I drink, I don't like the person I become." But actually the person that they become is the person that actually makes them happy. So it's really interesting that they feel so uncomfortable being themselves, because in their mind, it's like, "Oh, I can't be that person." But actually that's the person that they feel most comfortable with, they feel happiest with. And so the documentary kind of helps people to say, "Oh, okay, this is the part I'm suppressing. How now do I come out of the other side of that?" And that's available on my website.
And your website, John?
Is www.johnkennycoaching.com. I think it's under the resources tab. So johnkennycoaching.com/resources.
Thank you. So switching to like the topic of narcissists, we see a lot of this generation and people on social media talking about narcissist. So can you tell us what is a narcissist, and is it really common or uncommon?
I'll answer the second bit first. We don't know how common it is because narcissists don't seek treatment generally. So they go undiagnosed. But statistically, it's very small. I think it's 0.05 or something of the population will have some kind of narcissistic, but that's narcissistic personality disorder. So that's a diagnosed personality disorder. We all have some kind of narcissistic traits. We're all the narcissistic spectrum somewhere, because we'll always do something within our self-interest, even though we might say we don't. So there's an episode of Friends I love and they talk about there's no such thing as a deed. What's the word? I can't remember the word now. Selfless deed, selfless act. There's no such thing as a selfless act, because we all get something from it. So if I'm nice to you and you're happy about that, then I'm going to get something from that. So it's not selfless. I'm doing it because I want you to be happy, but I'm also going to feel better about it. Narcissists, however, so if we're on a narcissistic spectrum, a narcissist will be someone who can't see fault in themselves, that they are so insecure that to admit that they've actually done something wrong will trigger the stuff that they're carrying, which they're trying to suppress. So they generally would have been bullied, abused, or something in childhood, so that they therefore then have this sense that they can't allow themselves to see fault in themselves, because that proves that the things they went through in their childhood must be true, that there's something wrong with them. And so they have this kind of grandiose idea of who they are, and never admit they've got any faults. And they need everybody to fit into their structure in order for them to feel okay, safe, and secure. And so they will manipulate and do everything they possibly can to get people into the spaces that they need them to get into. Or they were maybe, and I think this is a problem we've got with maybe society nowadays, is that they were never told they did anything wrong. So they were never held accountable for their behavior. They were never held responsible for their behavior. So as they get into adulthood, they can't be accountable and they can't take responsibility. So no matter what they do, it's always someone else's fault. It's never them. Everyone else is to blame. They'll try and switch that onto you all the time and make you responsible for anything that goes wrong. They'll deny they've done things or said things, because it means, again, they'd have to admit that they've done something wrong, and they can't do that. So it can come from a couple of different spaces. But generally narcissism is not common, but people might have narcissistic type behaviors, or that's labeled narcissistic type behaviors, because they're unable to kind of buy into the idea that they have any faults or anything at all. And that's all a denial and self-protection space. They're very insecure narcissists. So if you're in a relationship with a narcissist or know a narcissist, the confidence that they exude is false. They're just in denial, and they're massively insecure and trying to protect themselves.
I think it's good to know that they're trying to protect themselves, but they may not have healthy behaviors, because I see a lot of people project or label people as narcissist and still somehow expect them to be different. And it's but they're still in a protection mode. They don't know how to be different.
No, definitely not. And that's what the classic narcissist is. They have no idea. They're completely oblivious. Even if they know they're manipulating you, they're oblivious to the fact that they shouldn't be manipulating you, because they think it's the right thing to do to get their own way. So yeah, and it is strange, isn't it? Some people go, oh, they're a narcissist and I'm trying to get them to do this and they won't. Well, that's because they're a narcissist. And to be honest with you, in a lot of cases, they're not narcissists. They're just people that are saying, I'm not going to do what you want me to do, and you can't make me do that. So, and some people label them as narcissists because they're not getting their own way. Instead, right. You're such a narcissist. No, I'm not a narcissist. I'm just not going to do what you want. Yeah, I think it's a term that's thrown around far too casually now.
Yeah,
definitely.
Because narcissism is a very insidious, real narcissism is it's an awful space to be in with somebody that's a narcissist.
Yes. So John, earlier you had mentioned that you have a book. Can you tell us the name of it and tell us a little bit more about the book?
Yeah, if you're watching on video, it's just up there. It's called The People Program. It's a coaching book. So a few years ago, I wrote a coaching program called the People Program, which you can also access on my website, as well as the book. And the first half of the book is my kind of life story. It's about overcoming your blocks to success. So I write about how I developed my self-sabotaging behaviors. So the relationships I had, the experiences I had growing up, and then subsequently throughout my life that led me to self-sabotage and block myself from being successful. As I said about the athletics earlier, I could have been a much better athlete if I believed in myself and my brain didn't throw things in the way to stop me fully achieving. And then that would happen in other areas of my life, especially relationships. Like I said, when I was in a healthy relationship, my brain would throw me a curveball and ruin it. So the first half of the book is examples of that. And then the second half of the book is a 6-part program, which is what the People stands for, the 6 parts of the program, which you can work through yourself with case studies and stuff, in order to understand if you've got similar tendencies and get out of your own way. Hopefully by the end of the book, when you put all that together, you can have a good, clear pattern about what you're doing, and then put things into practice will help you to stop it.
That sounds very interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And you also have a podcast. Can you share about that?
Yeah, so it's called The Relationship Guy, and it's been going for just over 100 episodes at the time of recording here. And it's a mix of guests that come on. Patty has been a guest on my show. Angela, you're more than welcome to come on if you want to come and have a chat.
Thank you.
And we talk about what you do as far as helping people is concerned. So it's more or less every guest I have on is in the service industry of some kind. So they're helping others. And then they talk about relationships. So the show is talking about how they help people, because that's obviously one of my key things in life, is to get people as much help as possible, even if it's through just listening to a podcast. And then we talk about relationships. So whether that's personal relationships, business relationships, or just relationships in general, we pick a topic and we chat about relationships and how they impact on my guests, and how maybe they've overcome challenges and advice and stuff they might be able to offer to people in similar or same circumstances. And then I also have what I call my relationship ramblings. So I pick a topic about relationships. So the recent one I just did is about self-acceptance and how self-acceptance is crucial in having healthy relationships. And I talk about that for a wee while, and give as much input as I can on different topics. Narcissism is a good one. I did a four-part podcast on narcissism. So if anyone's interested in finding out what narcissism is, how to spot a narcissist, why people date narcissists, and how to deal with a narcissist, please check out the podcast and listen to the 4 episodes where I talk about that.
Yes, his podcast is really good. So yes, check it out. You'll get a lot of nuggets from it.
Thank you.
So John, please tell us where we can find you, how we can contact you, and your services and your books and your courses and your podcast, which is called The Relationship Guy.
Yeah, so the Relationship Guy is available on most platforms. So wherever you listen, if you just put The Relationship Guy in, you'll have a little picture of me come up somewhere. Just click on and please subscribe and give me a good review. That would be awesome. If you want to access it via the website, you can do as well. So again, I think it's on my resources page. I've just had a brand new website built, so it's all bells and whistles and flying unicorns at the moment. So it's all looking good. So if you go to www.johnkinneycoaching.com, you can find out all about me. You can take my attachment quiz. So we talked about attachment earlier on. I've actually got a quiz on there where you can find out your own attachment style. I've got some resources on there, links to the podcast, documentary, my book, all sorts of stuff. And there's a few ebooks and stuff you can get as well. And obviously all the coaching I do. So if you want to interested in maybe looking at some coaching, then just reach out, just fill in the contact form, drop me an email, whatever it might be. And we'll book in. I do offer a 30-minute consultation for people complimentary. So just get in touch and we can get on a call.
Awesome. So, John, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, okay. So there's one thing that I was asked a question once, and they said, "What do you think makes the biggest difference to somebody in one sentence?" And then all of this stuff comes into my head about all these my favorite quotes and things like that. So I'll give you a couple of favorite quotes, and I'll tell you why they're my favorite quotes, and then I'll tell you this one big thing that people seem to get the most out of if they just take this one thing away. So one of my favorite quotes is by Homer Simpson. And in one of the episodes, he says to Lisa, he says, "Just because I understand it doesn't mean I care." And I thought that's really harsh, but it's true. A lot of people can understand where you're coming from, but they don't care enough to act on it. That doesn't make them a narcissist, by the way. That just makes them, this just makes your stuff not as important to them as maybe it could be, or you're expecting too much from them. So I love that quote because we have a tendency to think that because someone doesn't care, they don't understand what we're going through. But sometimes we need to recognize actually they do understand, they just don't care enough. And if you're in a relationship of that kind, then they're probably not a healthy relationship for you to be in, and not someone that you can turn to, want to turn to, should turn to in your time of need. I also love the quote by Carl Bard, which is, "Although we can't go back and make a brand new start, we can start now and make a brand new ending," which I think was the biggest turning point for me in my life when I had coaching, because my coach taught me that I was living my life over and over and over again from the same book. And I needed to start a new chapter. I needed to start writing my new life for myself. And I can create the life that I want and stop doing the things I was doing that were creating me problems. And the biggest thing probably take away from the workshops and stuff I've done is that nothing is personal. Because when people do things, we have a tendency to internalize it and we make it about us. And therefore we come from maybe a hurt, wounded, painful space if it's something we're uncomfortable with. Whereas if we can look at things that actually that person's just doing it because they're doing it, that's their thing, that's their stuff. And although they might be trying to hurt us in some way or affect us in some way, it may not be something that we like. They're doing it because of who they are and what they need to do it for. They're not doing it because of us. So if I'm a really nice person, it's because like I said, like that selfless act earlier on, it's because I benefit from being a nice person. If I'm going to be horrible to you, it's because I'm benefiting in that moment from being a horrible person. It's all about me. You might be doing something again that we're clashing over or whatever. But if I can depersonalize that space, then I can come from a space of response rather than react. So if I'm in a triggered space, I'm going to react to the situation. If I can depersonalize it, I can respond to that situation in a much healthier, measured, conscious, thought out, present type way.
Thank you, John. Beautiful.
Yes, very beautiful. Well, thank you so much for listening. Please share the podcast with others and check out John's website and services at www.johnkenneycoaching.com. And we will have John's website link in our show notes.
Thank you for listening to Building Better Relationships with Angela and Patty. Send us a message and please like or share the podcast or donate with the Anchor donate button. We really value your feedback.